World War II, the clash between the fascist world and not fascist world, as the most horrific conflict in human history was occurring. While France fell, Britain was bombed, the Soviet Union was invaded, Spain was just sitting there, being neutral. The nationalist government of Francisco Franco had just recently solidified power after a brutal civil war. Spain's infrastructure was destroyed, its gold was sold off to the Russians, and the nation was broke. Frankly,
boo, you stink!
It was in no shape to go to war. Since the Axis powers did aid the nationalists so much during the war, it's often wondered, hey, why didn't Spain join with Germany and Italy like Hungary and Romania did? I mean, it's not the hardest question in the world, but what if in an alternate timeline, Spain decided that putting all of its horses with the Axis was the best idea, declaring themselves fully allied with the fascist powers and sending their own military into war? What if in an alternate timeline, Spain joined the Axis? Alright, so right off the bat, there are a few things to consider. Why did Spain not join the Axis? The common conception is that Spain was smart enough to not get involved and played both sides to see who would win, which is kind of a half-truth. Spain did have a bias towards a certain side. Guess which? Franco flirted with the idea of joining the Axis, and talks went back and forth. Spain did aid Germany and Italy during the first half of the war, letting ships dock, sending raw material, even sending brigades into Russia. Before that endeavor took a nasty turn, there were so many reasons Spain didn't join. They lacked the fundamental resources, food, and infrastructure to conduct a modern war. The Civil War made sure of that. There were some turncoat shenanigans involving Admiral Canaris trying to turn Spain away from joining the Nazis. Not to mention Franco was uneasy about relying on Germany, fearing that they might betray him, Napoleon style. And the Axis believed that Spain would be a tremendous liability, unable to defend itself. And this was the side that had Italy. The only thing worse than no allies is incompetent allies. It was simply an uneasy arrangement, but it wasn't entirely impossible to happen. In this alternate timeline, let's say that things go a bit differently. Admiral Canaris, who was a turncoat against the Nazis, isn't put in charge of negotiations, and so there's a better chance of Germany being able to convince Franco to join them. Germany thinks the benefits of involving Spain outweighs the negatives, mostly just for access to Gibraltar. Since this is entirely speculative, we don't know when Spain could declare their support for the Axis. It could be before the war, right when Franco gets into power. It could be when the war is officially declared in 1939 with the invasion of Poland, or it could be at the height of Axis power in 1942, and Spain mistakenly believes that Germany could win. For simplicity's sake, let's just choose none of these, and imagine they join when Italy does after the fall of France. There's no chance of a French assault, and they can focus on defending their coastlines against the Royal Navy. Much to the dismay of the puppet French government, Germany agreed to Spain's wishes and allowed them to take some of northern Africa, perhaps in exchange for access to Gibraltar. The Spanish would launch an assault to take it from Britain. How successful this would be, who's to say? But even with their resource situation, the British would still be outnumbered and trapped against the Spanish offensive. Perhaps we would see something like a southern Dunkirk, which they reluctantly allow the Germans to operate for their North African campaign and to cut off the Mediterranean. Alright gents, we took Gibraltar, let's go onward! And they ran out of resources. Yeah, so it was calculated that if Spain had actually joined the war and mobilized their military, they would have ran out of supplies in a month and a half. The Spanish just fundamentally could not operate in wartime, even to defend their own shores, and Germany would know it. Would Germany come to Spain's aid to make up those lost resources? Perhaps like they did in Greece for the Italians, or the Balkans for the Italians, or North Africa for the Italians, or Italy. No, Germany had their own resource problem. Franco was not keen on allowing the Germans to cross into his territory. And also thanks to planning from Operation Felix, Germany concluded that even trying to transport troops and material across Spain's ruined infrastructure would just be too difficult. they'd be by themselves. Germany wouldn't want to divert important resources just to hold a peninsula that could be invaded from literally anywhere. They'd most likely garrison men alongside the mountainous border with Spain and France, extending that northern seawall further south. Early on in the war, Spain would be seen as the most obvious choice for an Allied assault. There would be one thing in the back of their head: they have to retake Gibraltar, using it as a foothold to eventually fan out and take down most of Spain. Now, what about the possibility that Germany might go south and help Spain out if they saw them failing? They might send some divisions to aid Franco, but this might be seen as a wasted effort if the tides turn against them. As Allied territory grows and Spain begins to collapse, I could see Portugal, which, despite being fascist, taking a more active stance considering the war is on their doorstep, joining with the Allies, or at least allowing them to use their ports. By going through Spain, the Allies wouldn't need to go up through Italy like in our timeline. What they supposed was the soft underbelly of Europe turned into a slog up the narrow peninsula of Italy, which in the end didn't have the decisive blow to the Axis like the Americans and British had hoped. Would the Allies, after capturing Spain, simply move north into France, entirely negating any need for a D-Day type invasion? I think if anything, a push into France would be done to coincide with the Normandy invasions, not entirely negate them. Trying to push through the mountains bottlenecks the Allied advancement. The Germans would know immediately where the Allies are pushing from, and would shift their armored divisions and material to the border with Spain in anticipation of an attack. The element of surprise would be lost. D-Day was in many ways a miracle to occur as the Germans reinforced the wrong beaches thanks to counterintelligence. A Pyrenees invasion would be going up against well-defended Germans. There would be no way to divert their forces or trick them into going somewhere else. Normandy, as much of a pain as it was to go through pastures and marshes, would be a cakewalk compared to Spain. Moving men and material around would be much more difficult since the roads and railroads are either non-existent or destroyed. All necessary equipment needed to liberate France would either have to be funneled through the mountains or dropped off after a few key port towns were captured. With all this said, I don't think the Allies would use Spain as the main jumping bed to invade France. The D-Day invasions would still need to happen, not just to liberate Paris, but now to divert German forces away from the south. In our timelines, there were invasions of southern France a few months after Normandy, and they went much smoother thanks to Germany already wasting men and material up north. If the Allies did choose to move in from Spain in this alternate timeline, it'd be after D-Day, to split up German defenses. The likelihood of going into Italy is very small. Italy could just as easily be invaded through the north once southern France was captured. Italy still surrenders, and Germany this time doesn't have the liberty of sending divisions in to bring Mussolini back. This would be a scenario that makes the Western Front much more difficult to defend for the Germans, and at least in Spain, a lot easier for the Allies than Italy ever was. Had Franco went down this path, we all know how it would have ended. And Spain, after the war, just like the others, would have been occupied by the Allies until elections are eventually held at a future date. By the end of an alternate 1945, Spain would have been at some form of conflict for almost a decade. So moving on to the future, Spain would receive funding from the Marshall Plan. Rebuilding slowly begins. Elections are eventually called on. And it wouldn't be lost on anyone what the significance of having another election in Spain would mean. Even with Franco gone, the tensions between conservatives and leftists still exist. As the world begins to enter a Cold War, don't imagine that the far left of Spain would be able to actually win any of these new elections. A potential Soviet ally rising in the West isn't what the Allies want. So had the people voted in parties that may have leftist policies, I'd imagine they'd be dealt with or nullified through any Cold War shenanigans you can imagine. In this alternate timeline, even though Franco and his government would be gone, I could easily see the Allies favoring many former nationalists, or at least conservatives that were once tied with Franco, to take over Spain once again, even if the elections said otherwise. This does not mean that Spain would go back to being a totalitarian state that it once was. It just means that even with an Allied victory and Franco gone, don't expect any Popular Front parties to hold power. Overall, in imagining this alternate scenario, the biggest change is simply that Spain was spared further destruction. The Civil War in 3 years had resulted in 500,000 deaths. It simply was a no place to join with Hitler and Mussolini, and for Franco at least, by chance, sabotage, and a whole lot of other shenanigans, simply not being able to fight saved his regime from the same fate. This is Cody of Alternate History Hub.